Welcome everyone. Just gonna give it a few more minutes or so for people to come on. Welcome. All right. Well, everyone, let's get into it, okay? So, hello. Welcome to the webinar, Embracing Life's Balancing Act. I'm Megan Claire Chase, and I am the Breast Cancer Program Director here at SHARE, and I'm also a cancer survivor. Now, this webinar will address the effective strategies we can put in place to reduce our chance of falling and of injury in the event that we do fall. We know many in the cancer and chronic illness spaces can experience falling because of an array of issues, such as aging, side effects from medications, or side effects from chemotherapy, like chemo-induced peripheral neuropathy. So for more information about CIPN, chemo-induced peripheral neuropathy, please make sure to check out our past webinar on understanding and managing CIPN, and Victoria will put that in the chat for y'all. Now, before the presentation begins, to tell you a little bit about SHARE. SHARE is a national nonprofit that supports, educates, and empowers anyone who has been diagnosed with breast or gynecologic cancers and provides outreach to the general public about signs and symptoms, because no one should have to face breast, ovarian, uterine, cervical, or metastatic breast cancer alone. For more information about upcoming webinars, support groups, podcasts, and our helplines, please visit our website at sharecancersupport.org. Now, all participants will be muted during the presentation. Once our fabulous speakers finish presenting, we'll begin the Q&A discussion. So feel free to ask any questions through the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. And remember that our speakers are unable to give specific medical advice, so please keep your questions general in nature. The chat is enabled, so please, comment, interact with each other in the chat, but make sure you're selecting everyone and not host and panelists. And make sure you use that little drop-down arrow in the chat section and choose everyone. We also have closed captioning available, and you can enable this feature by clicking the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen and selecting the subtitle option. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on the SHARE website soon. Now, before we get started, we have some poll questions for you. All right? All right. So our first poll question is, please tell us about yourself. Are you a patient? Are you a caregiver? Are you a family member? Are you a friend? And are you a healthcare professional? And then our second question is, have you ever experienced a fall? I'm going to say, yes, I have. I have multiple falls. So we're going to give that a few moments for y'all to check which one applies to you. All right. Okay, lots of patients here today. Got some family members, some friends, and wow, okay, almost, kind of split there. Some have fallen and some have not fallen. So this is really great. We're going to learn more about falls today, and I'm excited to have our first presenter speak. So Ayden, the screen is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you, Megan Claire. I'll go ahead and share my screen here in just a moment. So here's me. Great. This is wonderful. So a little bit about me. I'm a falls prevention consultant, and I'm also a master trainer in an evidence-based program called A Matter of Balance. I've been working in the fall prevention field for over 10 years now, and I'm currently working on a couple of different grant projects in New York State, but I've consulted at the federal, the local, and state levels for fall prevention. I'm also trained as a conscious dining coach, which is a way of having end of life conversations to enhance quality of life even until the very end. So without further ado, let me bring up my slides and we'll go ahead. All right. Okay. Everybody seeing that okay? Wonderful. So I'd like to ask that question again about how many of us have fallen in our lifetime. So maybe you're thinking of a certain time period, but I would imagine if we ask that question in the course of your entire life, how many of us have ever had a fall? Can any of you, even if you don't remember, sometimes you get the naysayers that say, well, I've never in my whole life. But even thinking back when you were a child, I imagine when you were learning to walk, Megan, Claire, yeah, me. So all of us at some point have probably had a fall. It's just a matter of as we've gotten older or as we're dealing with a different kind of condition, the falling affects us differently, right? So that's something that I just want to bring us all into the same page about, and make sure that we recognize that this is a shared concern. This is something that happens in life. It's nothing that we need to be embarrassed about, or there's all of these. Think of the Three Stooges, or all the time in our media, right? That we see that falling is funny or embarrassing somehow, but truly, it's not. It's just something that's going to affect us quite differently depending on where we are in life. That's the first thing I want to do, is just kind of peel back that stigma that there is around falling and it being this kind of scary imagery. Let me see. Sure, as a kid. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you, Jody. Thank you, Diane. Exactly. So that's one thing I wanted to establish. The next thing is that I wanted to share a story, and I invite you all to think of your stories as you are listening to mine, because the chances are that this is not a necessarily unique story. It's something that you probably know somebody, or you yourself maybe have experienced. So essentially, these photos are photos of my grandfather. His name was Hal Jones, and he was very much a horseman. He was into harness racing. If any of you live anywhere near Yonkers or the Meadowlands, Ohio, those are places where there's some pretty big horse tracks that have a lot of history. And so his role, for generations, his family had been into horses. His father had a job taking care of the horses at a rural cemetery in Kentucky. And when they told him they were bringing in a truck, an engine truck, they were going to get a vehicle, he said, well, I don't want the job anymore. And he moved up to Ohio to find a job with horses. So a long history of that in his family. So as you can imagine, he was on a farm. He was a pretty active guy for the majority of his life. You can see him to the left here when he was younger. And it was something that, as time went on, his parents didn't really live out of their 50s. So people didn't necessarily expect of this generation, right? They weren't expecting that they would ever see a day where they lived until they were 80 years old. And so I think what that challenge brought as a society, as people were coming out of the Great Depression, there was a lot of other things that people were concerned about. And falling when you're getting older, you necessarily weren't going to need to worry about. Well, as it came to be, as he started getting older, gravity is weighing on us our whole lives, and gravity starts bringing us down. And if you've seen people who are doing this slump, have you ever seen people that are walking this way? They're already kind of like halfway there. Well, that's how he started to walk. He started still. He was going out. He would drive his little golf cart. He would drive around his farm. Check on his horses every day. But over time, it was getting more and more difficult. He was starting to have some gait issues. You could see him kind of shuffling around. And the family that was around him had good intentions, and they wanted to figure out how to put in place some strategies that would help him, but they didn't really know a lot about this topic. So they tried to help as best they could. They bought him a walker at CVS when they saw he was kind of having this mobility issue. And now remember I said that because these are points that I'm going to come back to later. And then they had tried to just set up his house where in a way that he could stay at home. So unfortunately, one of the things that happened is the walker caught on the lip of a door frame as he was going through it, and it rolled right out from under him, and he went down onto a stone floor. And one of his sons was home at the time, and oh no, Dad, we got to get you up right away. Remember, I said that too, because that's going to be another point we're going to come back to. And they had tried to move him to the car so that they could take him to the emergency room, so they could tell that there was probably a significant injury there. So he gets down there to the county hospital, and they take one look at him and they said, oh boy, yeah, this is going to be more severe. We need to send you on to the big hospital in the next county that is a trauma center where they're going to be able to help more effectively. I see we got a chat here. Falling has made you a stronger person. Wisdom is learned. Absolutely. Yeah. With each scenario, right, we learn something. Exactly that. And so anyway, so they send him down to the trauma center. And once he gets there, they take a look at his medication list and his paperwork. They get in touch with his primary doctor, and they go, why in the world are you on all of these medications? He's on like 8 different things. And they're, trying to get him ready for a surgery because he's got a femur fracture of his right leg. He had a shoulder injury as well, but the leg was the thing that really was going to require surgery. So he goes through, a couple of days of getting ready for that. They do the surgery. Now he had already had some sensitivity in his throat. He had been losing his voice for a couple of years. When they put those tubes there to do the surgery, they end up damaging his trachea, and he couldn't swallow when he woke up from the surgery. And so the next step there, after about 4 days of that, they had given him an IV fluids, but he's not getting any nutrition. They figure out, well, we can't, because of whatever inflammation and damage is here, we're not going to be able to get a feeding tube in here. So, all right, we're going to have to put in a peg tube through your stomach. So they go through that surgery and that process. And after a few weeks, a couple of weeks there, then he enters a rehab facility that's closer to his home. Yeah. Thank you, Bridget. Yeah. And so from there, he spends a couple of months in this rehab facility. They've at this point adjusted his meds. He's had anesthesias, and this whole, he's in this institution in an unfamiliar environment, and he's really not fully with us at this point. He's talking about he's going to get on a boat. That was the thing, last time I talked to him. I got to find my wallet because I got to get, when the boat comes, he was getting ready for a journey. And so they tried to do physical therapy with him, but because he was cognitively just, not all there, they were really limited in what they were able to do for him. And so the decision was getting ready to be made to send him home, where he was going to end up being primarily in a bed with not very much mobility at all. So in preparation for that, they start having those conversations. The family starts to get things in place for the home. And he starts to have some internal bleeding at this point, and they say, okay, well, it looks like we're gonna have to send you back to the hospital. And he, on the way there says, to one of his sons, yeah, I don't know if I'm gonna get out of here. And sure enough, he ended up getting sepsis and passing away. His fall was in October of 2015, and he passed away at the end of January of 2015. So why am I sharing this really sad, depressing story with you? Because there's a lot to be learned from it. And because I want to, not to scare people, but I want to prepare people so that all of the things possible that you could do to prevent a fall. And then if you do have a fall, the things to know so that you can be sure to have the best health outcomes possible. So one thing to know, the good news, here we go. The light at the end of the tunnel here. Falls can be prevented. Statistically, we know this. The research is very clear on this. There is a lot of things we can do. The biggest challenge, Tiger, can you slow down and enunciate better? Okay, thank you, Karen, for that feedback. I will try to do that. All right, so falls can be prevented. And there's some statistics out there that suggest that potentially up to 70% of falls could be prevented. So that's great news because that means that 70% of the time we could look back and say, there's something we could have done here that would have changed the outcome. And that other 30% of the time, we can probably do something that will have made it easier for us to get through it, right? Maybe we have to fall because falling is just going to be a part of life when we live on a planet that it has gravity. But there is something that we can do about it. We can be proactive and make sure that even if we do have those little bumps in the road along the way of life and have a fall, that we can minimize the impact. The number one thing that I want you to know is that exercise should be looked at as like a medication, right? You're going to take your blood pressure pills for that. You're going to take whatever other medications you're taking for, as your doctor is instructing you. Movement is medicine for sure. Even when we don't feel good, it might actually help us feel a little better. And you should also know, let's see here. My aunt has been prone to falling. She has been diagnosed with liver cancer just recently. I'm concerned for her that this can happen again if she gets more treatment. Yeah, Bridget, and we can come back to some discussion at the end about that, but that's very much going to put her at higher risk. But I think you'll find as we go through this that there are things that we can do about it. So a couple of points here. We want to build essentially what we call in our Matter of Balance program, no faulty habits, right? We want to create these habits in our course of our day. I want to teach people to put on their fall prevention goggles and be able to navigate around more safely. And so movement is one of the best ways that you can do that, no matter where you're at, right? You can do things when you're seated. You can do movements when you're in a bed. You can get your rotating your ankles. These are some really important joints. Any of your hinge joints are going to be super important. I would say that physical therapy referral is something that you would want to ask your doctor for to figure out for your body what exactly is going to be the very best option for you in that regard. Few other points. So as you're listening to my grandfather's story, here's some things that could have been different for him that could have made his trajectory quite different. Number one is as it was noticed that his posture was changing and his mobility was changing, he could have joined a program. In today's world, we luckily, even more so than ever before, we have a lot of virtual options. So even if it feels difficult to get out of the house, you can join via Zoom. You can look at something on YouTube. There's a lot of options for inspiration on how to move and how to incorporate movement throughout your day. So that's number one. He could have done something differently there. All right, what we've got in the chat here. Oh, thank you for putting the link there for the YouTube. I'm going to show that here in just a moment. Yeah, recuperation, physical therapy at NYU. Thanks, Michelle. That's excellent. Yeah, so there we go. Another testament to physical therapy being super important. So that's one thing that could have been different for him. Another thing that gets overlooked a lot, assistive devices. Number one, I'd like to just take away any type of stigma people have about, oh, I'm old, or I'm a cripple. Oh, I have to use a walker. Well, you know what? That's your tool. One of your tools for freedom, right? Because that's going to help you stay safe and help you continue to do activities that you like to do. So a walker is absolutely essential if the doctor suggests that. But here's what you should know: do not just buy one at CVS and assume that that's the best one for you. What you need to do if you are going to have a mobility device, you need to have it fitted by a physical therapist. It needs to be, don't take your aunt or your sister, or somebody had one lying around and they don't need it anymore. If you do that, take it to your physical therapist and ensure that it's measured to your specific body, because what can happen is that it could become more of a hazard than a help if it's not the correct kind of walker, because there's a variety of them out there. So in my grandfather's case, they had him using one that was not the correct kind of walker for him, and it was slipping out from under him quite frequently, and that ultimately was what led to his demise, was that walker was not fitted for him, and it was not the correct kind of walker for him. So that's a really important note. Another thing, I'd love to, if you want to respond in the chat, what do you think I'm going to say next? So he has the fall, he's on the floor, and people rush in to pick him up off the floor. Anybody have any thoughts on that? Why is that not the best thing to do? Yeah, so the reason that's not, oh, here, somebody's responded. They could be hurt, something could be broken. Exactly. Thank you, Mary and Cheryl. So that's exactly it, right? Because what ended up happening for him, you could hurt yourself and injure him more. Yes, thank you. That's exactly it. So what ended up happening for him, he had this complex fracture of his femur, and the bone of his femur ended up moving almost all the way down to his knee, which is one of the reasons why the county hospital looked at him and said, wow, this is a significant trauma. We got to send you somewhere else. And it was just that much more time before they could really address what was going on for him. Don't pick them up. They could be more hurt. That's exactly right. So if you do end up having a fall, you need to take a moment and just kind of assess. And if people are there around you, don't let them pick you up off the floor just yet. Just take a moment and see how you're feeling. And then if there is a significant injury, then it's really important for that injury to be stabilized by emergency services. You want to bring EMS in. You want to let them stabilize the injury before they pick you up and take you anywhere. Any questions on that? So the next thing that could have gone wrong for him, as you might imagine, when he gets to the hospital and he's on many medications and he's not even really sure what they're all for. His doctor had, he had a doctor here and he had a doctor there, and the specialist didn't communicate with the primary. So he was actually on more pills than he needed to be. This is another really important factor, because if you are on 4 or more medications, that is a risk factor for falling. And so it's important to know, that your doctors are talking. And in the day and age today, we're getting better at this, because there are more and more electronic health record systems in place that are helping us to catch these type of things before they become disastrous. So in his case, some of the medication interactions were probably not helpful for him, for his balance, right? And so that's another thing that could have gone differently. So the other thing was that, after he was in this kind of compromised state, he wasn't really able to get up and move. And while obviously we want to be careful with ourselves, because the recovery from a surgery is a significant thing, we do want to try to move as we can and get right into doing that, because there are plenty of studies now that show that when we're able to do that, we do have better health outcomes. And so this is a place where we go back to that exercise as medicine, because if you're doing Tai Chi, for instance, is a really excellent way to sort of challenge your balance and then get back on balance. So you're practicing these cross hemisphere movements. So do you all, if you know anything about neuro brain science, when we do this kind of move, I know my hand is still here because my two sides of my brain are talking to each other. So when you do this, you're getting your two sides of your brain to communicate. And then when your feet are going, you're practicing that movement of catching yourself from a fall, essentially. So the next thing I want to show you, you're hearing all these things. Awesome. Michelle practices Tai Chi. You're there. So that's the key too. Finding something that you enjoy that's going to give you that opportunity, because when you set up those patterns in your brain, it's going to be easier to catch yourself from a fall. So I'm going to show this video in contrast for you to my grandfather's situation. That was pretty much the worst case scenario. I want to show you the best case scenario. This is called Sandy's story, and it's kind of what could go right if everything went right for you, a different kind of an outcome.
We can't hear
Yep.
it.
I can share it for you.
Yeah. Ayden, we'll let Victoria share it so we can make sure we hear the sound.
Sorry, you can't hear the sound?
We can't hear it.
Oh, okay.
Oh, now we can. Okay.
Well, my story
Here we go.
begins in 2009. In the fall of 2009, all of a sudden my back went. I'd had 2 previous laminectomies, and I couldn't move. And tried different things, and it didn't work, and finally I had surgery in February. I ended up with a cane, and I was constantly falling. Then in January 2015, January 20th, I took my little dog, 10-pound dog, outside to go potty.
No, it's playing
I
fun.
had slippers on, and she started to fall, and I ran to get her. And of course, I didn't get very far. I hit down on the ice, and I broke my femur on my right leg. I went to rehab. I had 3 months of private physical therapy, and I was still on a walker. I still couldn't walk. It was so frustrating, and it just wasn't fun. I didn't go out of the house. It was like, I became very down in the dumps, and my walker became my friend, and I hated it. My daughter found an ad in the paper about a Better Balance course, and she said, I think you should try it, and I not very nicely said, oh, come on, Kate, tried everything else. What do you think a stupid course on balance is gonna do? And she said, well, just try it, Mom. So I went, toting my little walker, and lo and behold, it did really good. About 4 weeks into the program, it's an 8-week program, I was using a cane. And I thought, whoa, this is pretty good. That ended, I went down to the Jersey seashore. I walked 10 miles on the boardwalk because it was old car weekend and I didn't want to miss any of the cars. And I thought that was pretty good. I hadn't done anything like that in years. There's something about this program that teaches you to think as you're doing and not just take it for granted. That's what I think we need as we age. I think we need to keep in tune with our bodies, and we don't.
One of the success stories we've had from this program is Sandy. She gained that confidence to be able to know what to do, and she was no longer as fearful of falling. She's gone on to be a coach for the program, and as well as participating in the next program that we have, which is Tai Chi Quan. And what it does, it helps people kind of get off balance and then get back on balance, so that you're learning what you need to do, that if you should start to lose your balance, you can regain it and you're less likely to fall. That's really powerful.
First day I said, this isn't me. I'm not a yoga person. I don't do Tai Chi. I'm not an earth muffin. And now I am an earth muffin. I took the Tai Chi within about 2.5 months. I didn't even use the cane, and that was the middle of winter. And it starts very slowly. It starts with just, like swaying your ankles, learning to feel your muscles. And you do feel them. And they don't hurt. It doesn't give you pain. Just recently, I was certified. Well, last April, I was certified in the Better Balance. And now I just was certified in Tai Chi about a week and a half ago. Because I want to teach. I think people should. I want them to be able to be as mobile as I am, to be able to realize they can get up and move. I wasn't able to, and now I am. I can walk, I can go shopping, I can do all the things I like to do. I'm free, I can do what I want to do. I don't have to sit in that foolish house and feel sorry for myself. I really, really didn't think it would work. And then I took these courses, and now I am here again. And I'm me, again.
Great. Thank you, Megan, for helping with the technical aspects of that video. So great. So I think you can see the contrast there, right? You can see the difference between
Majority of reasons seniors come to the emergency room.
Oh, sorry, was that a question?
Nope, it's good. You're okay. Keep going, Ayden.
Okay, all right. Alrighty, I'll find my slides here. Okay, so any thoughts or any reactions to that video? Do you see, you know, basically the contrast there, how different it was for Sandy when she was able to find the right resources and figure out the right things to do? So big difference, right? Something that I think is really important to point out too, and what she is discussing about the Matter Balance program is very much, I think, a universal experience that when we figure out what works for us, right? And when she was open-minded to say, well, you know, I'm not an earth muffin, but, you know, she found something that was making her feel better. So this is really the key thing too, that I think is important to know about fall prevention, that this is really, many of you probably heard of mindfulness, right? When we were kind of looking at that body and brain, mind, spirit, that whole connection, when everything comes together in harmony, right? And it has to be different for each one of us. So while there are a lot of best practice things out there for fall prevention that we know according to the research, the best solutions for this issue are going to be personal and practical, right? It's not going to be realistic if you know Zumba is not your thing, but you're like, oh, I got to get to the Zumba class so I don't have a fall injury. Well, that's not necessarily going to be realistic. It has to be something that you're going to enjoy doing, right? And it also doesn't mean you have to be running marathons, or it's not anything that you have to be super ambitious about. There are really small, simple movements you can do, a lot of them from a seated position, where you can create more flexibility and mobility. And the reason why this is so important is if you do have a fall and you've already set up all of these things in the best way possible, there's pretty clear evidence that you're going to have less injury and you're going to have an easier recovery time from the injuries and any surgeries that are necessary if your body is already in this kind of flexibility state, if you're already practicing some of these moves, right? Here. So could a program like that be used for someone with dementia? Jody, that's a really good question. So the Matter of Balance program in particular does require some decision making that can be difficult, and it's conversation based, sort of like a support group. Sometimes people with dementia are not really going to get that much out of it, but certainly some of the movements would be helpful. And there are a variety of other exercise classes. There's even seated Tai Chi classes that they've done with dementia patients that are very effective and very helpful. Are there many physical therapists that work specifically with cancer patients? I would take that to the Share crew. I think they probably have the best resources for that. And Cheryl, my physical therapist comes to my house and shows me things I can do with machines at the gym. Awesome. And they give me the incentive to continue even when I don't want to do anything. Exactly. And having that kind of partnership and support system is also really key. And we definitely see that when people are able to create that kind of support network, they are also going to have better health outcomes and fewer falls. All right, so this is just a little bit, if we have time, just a couple of minutes here about what was going to work for you. What is your specific scenario? What do you know works for you well? Because one of the things that's beautiful about a program like A Matter of Balance, or anytime you're in a community environment, or even an online support group and you have an online community, is when you share those best practice ideas with each other, and it can be peer-led. That's where that magic happens, right? Where you might learn something, or you might share something that really affects change and really helps the person next to you to make a real difference in their day. So some people have already been doing that. So Bridget, include the name of the organization again for balancing. So that particular program is called A Matter of Balance. That program is available in most states. It's also now available virtually. And so it's certainly something that you could join, a lot of times being offered through an area agency on aging. It may also be offered through some healthcare systems. And so if you would like to be connected to that program specifically, then by all means, yeah, thank you for putting that link. So there's the link for the larger program. You can learn more about it. But if you want to find a local community that's doing it, I'm happy to help put you in touch with the correct person for your location.
So Ayden, you can get to your closing soon so we make sure we have enough time for our
Yes,
second
ma'am.
speaker.
We're there. Yeah. Yep, that's it. So thank you very much. Please be in touch if you'd like with any additional questions or thoughts, or we can definitely make more community resources available to you all for this issue. But I hope this has been helpful for you, and we'll pass it on.
Thank you so much, Ayden. All right, everyone, we'd like to hand the screen over to our next speaker, Janvier. Janvier, the screen is yours.
Thank you. So hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Janvier Hoist-Forrester. I am a doctoral student at the New York Institute of Technology, currently pursuing a degree in occupational therapy. I'm actually in my last semester, so I'm doing my capstone now under the guidance of Megan Clare. And a very pertinent topic in my capstone is fall prevention and fall preparedness, right? So making sure that we do all the steps to reduce the risk of falling, but we're also prepared and confident in our ability to do it safely, because falls are inevitable and we have to, come to terms with that and say, okay, well, if I do fall, am I going to be safe? Do I know how to do it? Do I have a plan for it? So I'm going to get into my presentation. Okay. So today we're just going to talk about how to fall safely, right? After you get a diagnosis, when you're in treatment, and when you're in survivorship, because falls will happen throughout, right? So I want to preface this by saying it is a safe space. Even though if you haven't experienced a fall related to cancer, if you're a caregiver, with someone who may have experienced a fall, this is a safe space for everyone to learn about fall safety, right, and fall prevention. So falling can make you feel clumsy, especially if it happens frequently. It can make you feel fearful, frustrated, and those are all valid feelings, and those are natural feelings. So I just wanted to reiterate that it's okay. And you may fall throughout this journey, but this presentation is just to help you feel safe while you continue to heal, right? So I want to speak about side effects and sensitivities. And I know that Ayden kind of touched on this topic a little bit, right? Well, more than a little bit, when she spoke about how there are medications that will have us feel certain types of ways. So if we experience dizziness, if we develop CIPN from certain adjunctive therapies like chemotherapy or radiation, those will affect our body, and our body's reactions will either cause us to be at a higher risk of falling, or will cause it to be more dangerous if we do fall, right? So for example, if we're on blood thinners or we're taking chemotherapy, which naturally thins our blood out, we may be more likely to bleed for prolonged periods of time. So if we fall and we get a cut and we're bleeding, we need to make sure that, we have the right systems in place to get help as soon as possible. Or we may be more prone to bruising, right? Because our blood is thinner and we may have internal bleeding. Also CIPN, so damage to the peripheral nerves, that can alter sensation. I know that Share has a webinar on their website about CIPN. It was from a few weeks ago where they went into depth. So if you want to learn more about it, definitely check that out. But the lack of sensation that we may experience in our hands and our feet can make us insecure about walking, right? Because we don't know if we're taking the correct step or if we're feeling balanced. So those are things to consider when we think about fall prevention and fall preparedness, right? Being aware of the side effects from medications. So how are we going to protect ourselves? First and foremost, I want us to think about our head as prime real estate, right? So this is the most important part of our body, and this is the part that we need to protect the most, simply because of what we mentioned before, the medications, right? So if our head makes direct impact with the ground, we may get cuts on our head. We may have internal bleeding, and we want to reduce that risk at all costs. We don't want any injuries to the head that could result in more complications, right? And when we think about protecting our head, we have to make it something that we're trying to do all the time whenever we're falling or experiencing a fall, simply because we may be in a certain stage of our cancer journey where we may not have hair. We're experiencing hair loss, or we're in preparation for treatment and we're removing our hair, or we're in survivorship and our hair is starting to grow back, but it may not be as full as it was before, right? So hair is a natural barrier, especially when you come into impact or contact with the ground. It may not be as hard simply because your hair is there. So when it's not there, we have to accommodate for that. And how are we going to accommodate for that? We're going to protect our head, right? We're going to put our hands in our arms and we're going to shield our head and our face so that we can limit head trauma or the risk of head trauma. So I can't see you, but I'm hoping we're going to do this together, right? So there's just a few steps on how to protect our head effectively. So our first step is we're going to lower our head by tucking our chin into our chest, just like this. I'm hoping you do it with me. This will be like our first practice session. 2, we're going to place both of our hands around our head with our elbows directly in front of us, right? So it's like we're cradling our head. And those are the steps like before we fall, like at the beginning of our fall. And as we're descending and going down to the ground, we're going to try our best to turn to the side. Okay, so we're holding and we're turning to the side. And the reason that we're doing that is because we want the cushion of our arms, right, to take the force of the impact before our head does, right? So this reduces the risk of head trauma and broken bones. Now, say you're not falling forward or you can't turn to the side quick enough. If you fall backwards, it is okay. You just readjust your hand placement so that it's a little further back, right? And you're holding your head and you just don't want it to make direct impact with the ground. And of course, if you cannot, protect your head in a timely manner, if the fall is too quick, just make sure that you contact your medical provider immediately and let them know, hey, like I've had a injury, like I fell, I hit my head, just want to make sure that everything's okay. And I'm kind of briefly going to go over this slide. This is basically saying that we want to go to the side, right? So try for the side. These are all like little catchphrases I made up to help remember it, to make it more easy. So when we fall, we want to try to go for our side because there's more cushion there, right? So on our arms, on our thighs. I know that naturally we may try to put our hands out when we fall. I know that I do that sometimes, and that can be very dangerous, right? Especially because we're more prone to injuries at like our wrist or dislocation of the shoulder. It can lead to broken bones when we try to catch ourselves. So it's best that we try to land on areas with a little bit more cushion. And I know that when we're falling, it can be a shock and fear, right? Because it's like, oh my gosh, I'm falling. Like, what do I do? I want to make sure that I'm okay. I want to protect myself. But sometimes natural instinct kicks in and we may deviate from how we're supposed to protect ourselves in the safest manner. And with that deviation can be like tensing our bodies because we're fearful of impact. So we need to make sure that we're breathing. And I know that sounds difficult, but breathing will actually help you go through the motion and it'll help your body absorb the impact better. So if you're tense and you hit the ground, you're more likely to become injured. So I like to say, be loose as a goose, right? Think of this little goose that's in the corner. You want to be loosey-goosey, right? Breathe through it, go with the motion. And as you're going through the motion, I want you to roll. Now, I'm not saying roll about 20, 30 times like you're rolling down a hill, maybe like once, right? And that way it just helps prolong the fall and it better helps your body absorb the impact by spreading it out, right? So if I just land on one side, the impact is on that side. But if I land on one side and kind of roll with it, I'm spreading out that force and it reduces the likelihood of injuries to one side of my body. And only do it if you have a clear path. So those are a lot of steps, right? Like I want you to protect your head. I want you to try to aim for your side. I want you to breathe as you go. Like I want you to be loose as a goose. And I want you to roll. And realistically, when you are falling or about to fall, there's a lot of steps to go through, especially in a period of 3 to 5 seconds. So I'm aware of this. And what I like to tell people that I come into contact with, patients, caregivers, is we have to be real, right? So 1, we're going to protect the head always. And if we cannot get through the other 3 steps that were in between there, we're going to meet with meat. Now, as funny as it may sound, it is a really good catchphrase because it sticks. So you want to meet the ground or whatever surface you're falling on with the most cushioned areas or meaty areas of your body. So if that's your butt, if that's the side of your arms, if that's the thighs, it allows the body to be to absorb the impact better, right? Because there's more tissue it has to get through before it hits bone. And if it's just direct impact with bone, you're more likely to break it. And this is, just if all else fails and you can't remember. the other steps. You don't have time to go through the other steps. That's okay. And I want to reiterate that practice makes perfect, right? So the more you practice, the more second nature it'll become. I don't expect you to be falling safely in the next week or so, right? It's a continuous thing. So you've fallen, and now what? And Ayden lightly brushed on this as well. So checking for injuries is very vital. And like she said, if you feel injuries, if you see injuries, right? Because sometimes we may not be able to feel it if we do have CIPN or other side effects that affect our sensitivity or skin integrity. We need to check, visually check, right? If we feel those, don't get up and call the emergency services. If you don't feel anything, right? If you feel like, okay, I'm kind of fine, I can get up a little. First, I would suggest like sitting up, right? And then we move from there. And there are ways to get up safely, like different techniques. I'll touch on it briefly later, but not really go too deep into it because it kind of is tailored to the person and their condition and some impairments that you may have. So you're checking for injuries. If you feel like you can get up, get up. If you have injuries, stay down, right? And wait for emergency services to get to you. Either way, notifying someone is very important. And if you do get up from a fall, right, and say you go sit in a chair, I would notify someone immediately, whether that's a caregiver or someone within your support system, just because it lets them know, hey, okay, she fell. Let me check on her later just to see if she's okay. And it's also a chance for caregivers to document this, right? So to say, okay, she fell at this time. These were the circumstances around the fall. This is how she felt after the fall. And the documentation can show you whether it's happening more frequently, if it's spread out, and you can show it to your provider and say, do you think that we need different services? Do you think that we need occupational therapy or physical therapy to address this, right? Or is it something underlying? Is it the medications reacting with one another? One of the most important things that I personally love to have is programming emergency phone numbers into my phone. I feel like emergency preparedness is very vital. And I feel like it should be practiced before the emergency happens, right? So whether you have a smartphone and you can just say like, oh, hey, Siri, or hey, whoever, can you contact my emergency contact? Having that phone number in there prior to the emergency happening will reduce the amount of time that someone needs to get to you. And if you have a phone that doesn't have like the voice activation, there are ways that you can program it in with pressing like pound in the number or star in the number, right? It just reduces the steps that it takes for someone to get to you and to check on you. And a part of that plan is also making spare keys, right? So having a spare key, I'm not saying a lot, like tape a spare key to the mailbox or anything, ridiculous like that, but maybe having a spare key hider. So they have like little rocks and garden gnomes that you can leave outside the house that are very discreet, or apartment buildings, you can have like lock boxes so that someone can get to you in a timely manner without panicking or having to like bust down a door or, anything dramatic in that sense. So I did include ways to get up from a fall. I'm not going to go over it just because I want us to have time to answer questions. But there are different techniques to get up. Different therapists do it different ways. And sometimes it's very tailored to the person to make sure that they're comfortable and that they feel confident in that way of getting up. But when this is posted on the SHARE website, you can definitely go through it. It is just a general way to get up safely. And I know for me, I'm a very visual learner. So this was a lot of information to take. And I know that I went through it very quickly. So I provided some links. I provided a YouTube link, and they should be put in the chat soon. I provided a YouTube link on how to get up safely and how to fall safely. And I provided an AARP visual instruction guide. So it's just pictures and words that will take you through, but just so you can visually see someone doing it, right? And if you want more information on it, you can always type into Google step-by-step of how to fall safely. Just make sure it's from verified organizations or trained professionals. And there's a lot of programs like the one Ayden mentioned. There's also like Fearless Falling. That's another program that you can attend if you want to. So what are my takeaways from this presentation? If you don't remember anything else, I hope that you at least remember these 5. So first, protect your head. That is prime real estate, right? We want to make sure that we reduce the risk of head trauma or head injuries because that's a whole nother ball game, right? Meet with me. So if we don't remember the steps in between or after protect the head, we want to make sure that we're meeting with the most cushioned parts of our bodies. So we're reducing our risk of broken bones, right? 3, expect bruising, especially when we're on adjunctive therapies like chemotherapy or radiation or medications that may thin our blood, right? Because bruising will be natural with the fall. The severity of the bruising can differ, right? And if you're ever concerned about the amount of bruising, you can always contact your healthcare provider. 4, have the emergency contact plan in place. Practice the emergency contact plan to see if it is effective, if it is efficient, right? And if it's not, tweak it and adjust it so that it fits and works for you. And lastly, practice makes perfect. So the more you practice, the more natural you will become at these techniques, right? You can pick and choose, kinda, not really. I would prefer that you didn't. But you definitely need to protect your head and meet with me. Those are the things that I suggest more often, than not. And your therapist, if you do have a therapist, you can work with physical therapists or occupational therapists, and they both address fall prevention, right? And it's very client-centered, so we'll make it work for you and what you want. And that's my presentation.
Thank you so much, Janvier. So we are going to get into some Q&A. Elaine, I see your question in there. She definitely wants to see those slides. And like we said, just we can get to a couple more questions, but we will have those slides available in the recording in a few weeks. And we did do a program about CIPN that talks about falls and things done specifically in relation to chemo-induced peripheral neuropathy. So Victoria, if you could put that in the chat again, a link to that webinar. And so Ayden and Janvier, what can caregivers do to help prevent falls? Because I know, Janvier, you mentioned having that emergency contact, but what are some tips that we can give our caregivers for us to help reduce our fall risk or to get up from a fall? Either one of you can take that first.
Sure. So I think the biggest thing is that the inclination always is, oh, we better get you up right away, but do not practice the pause. I think is a big, big, important one. And another one that we see quite often is when someone is proactively trying to address their fall risk by doing exercises. Sometimes the caregivers are, oh, just sit right down and let me do that for you. But really, you need to allow that person to get in some type of movement in a safe way, of course. But if they're participating in a program or working with a physical therapist, allow them that space to practice those movements so that they can set up that patterning in the brain that will help them catch themselves from a fall, and encourage them to find the space in their day to do those things as well.
I agree with Ayden, especially on the last part. Not necessarily babying someone or like walking them through the motions, giving them that chance to do things because we learn from experience, right? So if we're doing actions that we have to do in our everyday life, like getting dressed or putting on our shoes, we have to make sure that we can do them and stay balanced, right? But we won't learn that unless we practice it. So giving them the space to do that on their own would really be beneficial.
So I know mobile devices were mentioned, and as someone who has been a fall risk, I actually have to say that if I go in for a procedure at the hospital, they have to put a little wristband on me, and I am someone who is, not on the older scale. And for those of us that have had cancer, no matter our age, it ages us, right? And so we've got a couple of questions, and I'm kind of combine these. Are there any good tips on like walking sticks or a cane, and also any type of shoes that are recommended or describe like the type of soles that would best work for people who are fall risks?
Yeah, I can tell you house slippers and flip-flops are absolute no's. And so things that are very good support that work with the curve and shape of your foot, consider seeing a podiatrist, a specialist in feet, who can recommend something specific. I think those would be really helpful things.
Janvier, do you have anything to add?
Yes. So shoes with grips at the bottom can sometimes be a plus, but it can also sometimes be like a draw because it could be too heavy for the foot. So really wearing the shoe and seeing like, is this comfortable? Can I walk on this? Can I pick my foot up in this? There's also the option to add grips to the bottom of shoes. They sell them on like different websites, and they varied in like thickness, and you can add them to your shoe with whichever is more comfortable. Like if you have a pair of comfortable shoes that you really like, you can always, you know, help add to it so that it's less likely that you'll fall in them. In terms of the canes and walkers, Ayden mentioned it perfectly before, like you have to go to a physical therapist to have them fitted for you. That's the safest way and the safest route to go through that. Occupational therapists don't necessarily work with the canes and walkers, but physical therapists specialize in that in terms of mobility, right? So if you want it to work for you, you should go to a specialist so that it'll fit for you.
Fantastic. And so I think it would be great to hear what the difference is between physical therapy and occupational therapy, and how either they are kind of similar in helping with cancer patients, just to give our audience a better understanding of the differences between the two.
Of course. So the easiest way that I can explain it, without making it super complicated, is physical therapists will help you get from point A to point B, right? So they work on mobility, they work on balance, they work on strength, right? So how can I get you from here to here? And occupational therapy is more about how can I help you do the things that you need to do and you want to do while you're on the journey from A to B, right? So occupational therapy is more about the functional skills needed to do occupations that you do in your everyday life. And occupations doesn't mean jobs. It means anything and everything you do. So brushing your teeth is an occupation, doing your hair, putting on your makeup, driving your car. So we are the specialists who help you engage in those activities as safely as possible and as independently as possible. But we also do, I don't want to say a little bit of physical therapy, but it is honestly like physical therapy where we work on strength, we work on balance and mobility, but we're doing so by helping you engage in those activities. So whereas it may be just like exercises with one, it's I'm actually going to bring you into the facility and we're going to practice putting on our socks, right? Because that's something that you have to do in everyday life. And if you need compensatory strategies, if I have to teach you how to do it in a safer way, that's what I'm here for. If I have to give you assistive or adaptive devices to help you put that sock on, that's what I'm here for. So yeah, that's kind of the difference. We just help you remain independent and engage in the occupations that you like to and want to or need to engage in, whereas physical therapy focuses more on like your mobility and your ability to do those things, right? I hope that.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Ayden, do you have anything to add?
Oh, I responded in the chat to Carol's question about walking sticks. We love walking sticks, especially some of those active agers really get out there. Younger folks like to use them. They're awesome, but I would still recommend asking a physical therapist just to check out the fit and all the things to make sure that it's exactly right for you.
We have a question here. It says, please repeat 3 parts of PT. Oh,
So they work with mobility, right? So your ability to move. They can work with balance. They can work with strengthening. Yes.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So, let's see. You mentioned, I have to laugh with the meat, because I'm like, I got some meat on me, y'all. I do. And as someone who actually has fallen, I had a grade 3 sprain, like it was a hair away from a hairline fracture, because I could not feel my feet. And I've learned now, and some of the questions we received with registration, you know, it talks about like the side effects, and both of you mentioned, you know, with side effects, and sometimes you may not even realize that you are dizzy or that even your balance is off until you fall. And so I'm wondering if you have like any tips for recognizing the signs even like before you fall, or, you know.
Yeah, I think, a good point of vulnerability is anytime your medications change, know that you're going to be vulnerable. That's a potential kind of red zone. So anytime there's a medication change, any adjustments like that that could cause dizziness or drowsiness, that's going to be a point of vulnerability. So really be careful in that time period. I think is an important one. And certainly if you know that you have vertigo, these kinds of things, have that thing in place, have that walker available so that you know, like, ooh, there's something there. There's a good semi truck drivers have like these safety protocols, and one of their safety protocols when they're up and down out of their trucks and hauling stuff around is 3 points of contact at all times. So at all times, if you're reaching for something, make sure you got 2 feet and 1 hand on something at all times.
That's a good one. Janvier, do you have anything to add?
Oh no, I think Ayden said it perfectly. Honestly, they teach us in school that, you know, when you are transitioning from certain medications, that you have to give it a few weeks to really see the side effects, right? Because you may not see it right away. And then when you do notice those side effects, you can speak to your provider about them if they, you know, bother you. But if it's like life-saving medication, there's things that we can work around, right? But can I add one thing? Sorry.
Yes.
So I did see in the chat that Kathy said that mobility really isn't everything, isn't it? Maintaining it is crucial to quality of life. And I do want to point out quality of life is what we aim for as OTs, especially because yes, we want you to walk, we want you to be able to get from place to place, but we want you to be as independent in everything that you do, right? So that you don't have to rely on anyone else as to best of your ability. So that's what we strive for as occupational therapists, is to improve quality of life and maintain quality of life.
So we're just going to go over just a little bit, everyone, because I just want to, get a few more questions in there. I think what both of you just said is really great for also our caregivers, because I want to just give a shout out to caregivers, because though I'm a cancer survivor, my mother also has cancer, and I have also been aware of any treatment changes and things like that, and making sure she's got what's called a Motivo. It looks like a Cadillac. She gets compliments everywhere, but it's like a rollator, but it's very fancy. But like recognizing, I'm like, hey, it's too long of a distance. I really think you should use, your rollator today. And I think this program is really good for us caregivers to kind of recognize the sign, because when we're taking the medications, and like you said, it can take a few weeks before we, as the patient, notice any type of mobility changes or even the dizziness, but our caregivers or our friends and family might notice it sooner and can alert us, so we make sure that we're then talking with our medical providers, right? Let's see. So are there programs, so like you mentioned, Ayden, you mentioned Tai Chi in your program. Like, does that also work on, because I think of those of us, we've had treatment and now we have a lot of other, permanent damage internally, which can then affect our mobility, and maybe, the scoliosis that wasn't as pronounced pre-cancer now is really pronounced post-cancer, because a lot of our movement and even our posture and how we sit can be affected. What are ways that we can work on that, or what are questions we should ask our providers?
Yeah, I think the biggest question is, can you give me a referral for physical therapy? Number one, because they're going to be able to look at your unique situation and make specific recommendations for you. But generally, when you look at all the evidence, there, movement is still important at whatever capacity we can, right? Like, even if we are working with a dementia patient who's in a bed, we can still practice with them as the caregiver. You can practice some of those ankle rolls and things with them, that whatever amount that we can just make it a little bit easier is important. And the other benefit is, we don't want our caregivers to go down from a fall either and be out of commission, right? And so for them to be practicing their mobility as well alongside of the patient is super important and valuable as well. But I think, scoliosis, whatever, postural changes, all of those things can be looked at with physical therapy, and can certainly benefit from some type of movement in most cases.
And Jean-Pierre, what would you say from the occupational therapist point of view?
No, I agree with everything. Yes, movement is important, right? And I do think that caregivers taking on an active role and doing things with the patients definitely makes all of the difference, right? Because it's like, okay, I know exactly what you need to do because I've done it too, right? So I can help you in times where we're at home and it's like, okay, well, let's practice this together. Let's do this together. Let's get you moving, because there's only but so much improvement that can happen in a facility, right? It has to be transferred at home as well. Like, we have to take those steps in order to see the changes, right? So.
Absolutely. And then we'll ask this one last question here, and then we will wrap it up. I appreciate y'all staying on. what do you think about water aerobic exercises for seniors? And I can tell y'all right now, I've had aquatic therapy. I just finished 5 weeks of it actually last week, and it has been huge change in my posture and how I stand, so it's not hurting as badly. So I did want to give a shout out to aquatic therapy for any age. Has been amazing. But let's lead us out with this question.
Yeah, I concur. I have older adults in some of my programs that say it's wonderful. I don't worry about falling when I'm in the pool. So they can get in those movements for flexibility and mobility, but they're, that concern about, oh, if I start exercising, am I going to fall, is kind of taken away. So I love it. I think that's a wonderful thing.
Me too. Janvier, do you have anything else to add?
No, that was all. Thank you for allowing me to speak here and, bringing awareness to fall preparedness.
Well,
I think
thank
Sarah
you
was
both.
asking about, do you have to actually fall? I've seen some very innovative PTs offer programming at trampoline parks where they actually practice having people fall. I don't see that very often because of some of the liability that comes into play. You don't have to actually fall. If you practice your Tai Chi, if you practice those cross hemisphere movements, you're going to get the benefits and you're going to set up that pattern in your brain that's going to be protective.
And then also, yeah, and to also prepare, making sure when you fall, don't tense up when you fall.
The
So
hardest thing
thank
ever,
you,
just
everyone.
relax.
Right? Thank you, Ayden and Janvier. This was very
Thank you.
informative. And thank you to everyone who attended. We appreciate it. So make sure to check out Share's upcoming educational programs and support groups. We've got an upcoming podcast from our BC Life coming up, and for our NBC Life coming up. And please take a moment to complete the survey after the webinar. It'll pop up as soon as we end this. We really do read those, and that helps to drive our content and what we produce for you in these programs. And again, we will send this out once it's ready. You'll get a notification that this is on our website, and we'll make sure to get some of those slides about what to do, how to get up that Janvier went over as well. So thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day and a great weekend. Thank you, Janvier and Ayden.